Welcome to a special New Year edition of the Craftsmen Online Podcast. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmenOnline.com. Just a reminder that the viewpoints expressed in this podcast are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body of which that member may hail. We're very excited this year to be sharing the top 10 most listened to Craftsmen Online podcasts for 2021. Little history back in time. On Monday, March 14th, we launched the Craftsmen Online Podcast, and we're looking forward to kicking off our second season on Monday, January 10th. On this episode, we're going to pick up with the top 5 episodes. These are the most listened to episodes of the year 2021. But before we start, let's take a quick look back on our top 10 so far. In number 10, we had Clandestine Freemasonry with Eddie Abdul.
Number 9.
The Green Lantern and Freemasonry with Worshipful Brother Joe Evans.
Number 8.
Western Esoteric Traditions in Freemasonry with Worshipful Brother Milos Jeziorski, also known as MJ Dorian from the Creative Codex podcast.
Number 7.
The Greatness of Manly P. Hall with Worshipful Brother Joe Martinez.
Number 6.
Observing the East with Worshipful Brother Luis Gonzalez Jr. And that brings us up to
Number 5.
Our 5th most listened to episode is on Esoterics with Brother Rene Perez, who's the marshal at George Washington Lodge, number 285 in New York City. Rene joined me for an open discussion on how when seeking deeper knowledge, we must be open to all the sources available to find it.
You know, there's a Rosicrucian motto, meaning it says, become a human ? Question everything. Don't believe everything you read. And I don't believe everything I read. But what I do is I read books that were from back then, that were written maybe 2,000 years ago by the philosophers. Even the Quran I read the Torah, I read the everything, you know, regardless of. And what I do is I compare. So when you compare and you have another guy who's saying this, and you have another person who's saying the same thing, so that's how I compare and contrast. And then I come with this an idea saying, okay, wait, there's something here. I try to read as a Mason, you know, I believe in universal reading everything. To the philosophers, even to some esoteric authors, they call it the Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. They call those 3 the angelic languages, because there is something hidden in their languages. If you know it, and each of the alphabet is related to a number, which they call gematria. So, you know, when you try to put that and you do that type of lecture using a lot of gematria, it kind of makes me go, okay, look, I don't know about, I don't like numbers, you know, because when you start throwing numbers out there, especially in logic, it goes over a lot of people's heads. You know, so
just mentioning the word gematria, I think, is enough to kind of lose.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, that's the challenge. And I'm sitting here listening to you talk about this, and as a Freemason that is interested in esoteric thought or literature or thinking, I'm all in. Like, I'm sitting on the edge of my seat here. I want to hear more. I'm sitting here going, man, if you hadn't found Freemasonry when you found it, who else would you be having these conversations with?
Good question.
There's not enough crazy guys on park benches in New York City to talk to about this stuff.
It is funny, you know, at one time, you know, you do feel kind of alone, you know, like some kind of loneliness. You don't know who to express this to or to talk with. And, you know, I didn't have interest in Freemasonry at one time because, you know, I've heard from many people who were Masons, oh, there's nothing in there, you won't find anything. But from being affiliated with other esoteric orders and the people who were the founders of those orders were Masons. And I asked myself, okay, all these guys that I've been reading, like Manly P. Hall, Paul Foster Case, Louis Claude de Saint Martin, Robert M., they all were Masons. So let me see what's, you know, what is it in Masonry that maybe I'm missing.
Number 4.
Our 4th most listened to episode has been the subject of many Masonic historian and authors over the centuries. to try to seek out the origins of the elements of Masonic ritual. A lot of research has been traced to ancient cultures, religions, and historical figures. Although here in the 20th century, a new source was discovered. In Star Wars, Worshipful Brother Patrick Connor, past master of Harmony Lodge No. 9 in Cranston, Rhode Island, shared how the story of Star Wars connects with our Masonic lessons.
You learn in Empire Strikes Back, you meet this green little guy, Yoda. No one knew what it was going to be, but that little puppet, I think, gleaned more knowledge to most men our age now. We hearken back to that. And I think, we always go back to pass on what you have learned. And I know in my lodge, and most lodges, right? If you're an officer, you're always told to look out for the guy ahead of you and the guy behind you, because you're going to share that information. And it's not just, learning the ritual or helping another, but it's also learning the day-to-day duties of that officer's position and running a Masonic lodge. So you're kind of learning that. And then I think we also forget about one of the quotes that I always thought in that movie that he said that really doesn't get a lot of attention is, when he finally lifts the X-Wing out of the swamp, and Luke just says, I can't believe it. And that moment struck me when Yoda turns around and says, and that is why you fail. Mm. We have a lot of quotes from him, but that one is the idea of not believing. Because when you become a brother and you're going through all this stuff, you meet a friend that you learn to be a brother, right? So you kind of experience that firsthand again, because you hearken back to, your favorite movie. You're going through this thing that it's new to you. Again, it harkens you back to being on an adventure and a journey.
Just as Freemasonry is not a religion, neither are the Jedi. Yet we are both kind of deeply bound to moral teachings. And in Freemasonry, we say, so mote it be, at the end of prayer, as you saw at Invocation tonight. And the Jedi phrase, it's may the Force be with you. How do you see the balance between religion and morality between Star Wars and Freemasonry?
I kind of look at it like, again, I'll harken back to like Rogue One, like Cheer. He's a very spiritual person, right? He's blind, but he's very strong with the Force. And when you're in that marketplace and he's walking by and he says, may the Force of others be with you. That was originally what Lucas had scripted to be the catchphrase. And somehow it got shortened and things and became, may the Force be with you. But when you think about may the Force of others be with you, that even hits home more, right? Because I think that's really what we're about. Because we know we're not on this journey alone.
Number 3.
I'm fortunate through this podcast and the work of CraftsmenOnline.com to have connected and developed a true friendship with Brother Angel Millar, a member of Compact Lodge number 402 in New York City. Angel recently released his 5th book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in the Age of Chaos. You can purchase his book through Amazon or Barnes & Noble. On our episode around Freemasonry, initiation, and the mysteries, we discussed his path to becoming a Mason and the meaning of Freemasonry.
There's that Zen story of the Zen Buddhist monk who a regular person goes to see him and wants to know about Buddhism, but has all these opinions, and the Zen monk starts pouring tea into a cup and lets it flow over, and then the other person starts saying, what are you doing? The cup is overflowing and no more can go in. And the Zen Buddhist monk says, essentially, that's like your mind, nothing more can go in. So we have to kind of get rid of our preconceptions sometimes. And one of the big problems with Freemasonry is that everybody wants to superimpose whatever they like on that, whether it's the Templars or alchemists or the Rosicrucians or ancient Egypt. And everybody says that, I figured out the real origins and meaning of Freemasonry. And surprise, surprise, it's something that I claim to have some kind of familial connection to usually. Let's trace the origins of why that would be, because that's probably not coming off on an Oddfellows podcast, right? Well, you can trace the roots of Freemasonry back through the old charges, which go back to around 1400. So I think we have a pretty good idea. You can follow that back at least. I think what often happens is people try to overcomplicate it because they would prefer if it came from alchemists Or if it came from the Knights Templar, yeah. I don't like to be a party pooper and tell people it's not all from the Knights Templar. But the reason, I do say that, apart from the fact that there's no real historical proof when you actually look at it, is that it's not that I want to be down on anybody's interest. It's that I don't think you can rely on a fantasy. If it let's say it did all come from the Knights Templar, let's just say, ultimately, big deal. What does it mean? Does it make Freemasonry any different? Are you a knight? Are you out fighting crusades? No. So it's no big deal to you. If you want to be a knight, that's fine, but start doing knightly things. Are you working out? Probably not, right? Taking a martial art? Probably not.
The service to God and all the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can structure your life pretty much as a knight if you want, but if you're not, don't worry whether it's from the Knights Templar or not. I have a link allegedly to a historical knighthood, but I'm never gonna do anything that remotely resembles that. Well, what does it matter? Don't worry about it. Wouldn't matter where it came from then, would it?
Number 2.
We're getting closer to finding out what will be the most listened to episode of the Craftsmen Online Podcast for 2021. Our countdown continues with Brother John Nagy of Pearl of the West Lodge, number 146, in Newport Richey, Florida. Brother John has been a frequent guest on our podcast, and I'm very proud of the Building Better Builders partnership that we've created in sharing Masonic knowledge. This year, we produced a series on the working tools of each of the degrees. In our second most listened to podcast of the year, Brother John points out an additional working tool displayed during the Entered Apprentice degree and its significance.
The point within a circle flanked by two perpendicular parallel lines. It is a working tool, and it is one of the most diverse working tools. If you've ever seen my 6.5 hour workshop, I use that throughout the entire 6.5 hours, showing all sorts of neat diagrams using a circle with a point within it and two lines. I even touch upon the fact that that particular configuration, when you throw a Bible on top of it, is a working tool denoting obligation.
It's why it's super significant when you said usually an Entered Apprentice doesn't ask you about the working tools. It's kind of our role to explain these deeper meanings to them.
It's up to us because they won't do it on their own. They're too busy being told what to do. They're being told what to memorize. They're being told what to regurgitate back. I have yet to see a dominant thrust by any jurisdiction to focus upon explaining the application of the tools that are quite visibly used throughout, or at least pointed and directed toward through the Entered Apprentice ritual. I said almost. I actually know of one area in Kentucky where they progress their apprentices and fellow crafts extremely slowly. They admit people into the lodge that are willing to do a very, very long form, drawn out internship, so to speak. And they're basically asked in the beginning, do you want to basically move yourself up to Master Mason like most jurisdictions do? Or do you actually want to take your time, learn the degree, do the work that the degree actually points you toward? I don't think there has been one candidate, or shall I say petitioner, who has taken the easy way out. They have a journal. They have workbooks that do time management analysis. They set their priorities and they communicate and talk about what they are. They have a mentor that they can talk about their specific vices and superfluities in confidence, chest to chest, so they can start looking at what it takes to divest themselves of the ones that are causing the greatest challenges in their lives. They're literally birthing men in this particular lodge. And I'm whelmed at how they've taken some of the books that I've written and taken it to the next level, and they're applying it within the lodge itself. It's wonderful to see. And I get weekly updates, which is really cool.
It's also a great way of explaining the maturing process that goes through the role of the rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar. And I feel that so many times in ritual, you'll be told, okay, well, there's the rough ashlar. And then as, Masons, we want to strive to become a perfect ashlar. Boom. We never really talk about that long line of how from A to B. And I think you did a great job of explaining that building process.
I can tell you this, it's unfortunate within our society, we don't have an addition to the rough and perfect ashlar. We don't have anything known about the common ashlar. And I often hear people say, oh, I'm always going to be a rough ashlar. And I just cringe because they have no clue what they're saying. They have not coming from an operative background, or at least not even taking the time to study operative masonry, they don't understand that the moment that you take a tool to a rough ashlar, it is no longer known as a rough ashlar. It's now known as a common ashlar. And as it's being moved from rough ashlar to perfect ashlar, that common ashlar basically means it's being brought up to suitability for the builder's use. And when it's finally suitable, then it's ready for raising and it's ready for positioning and cementing. The problem is that most Masons that I encounter, they believe that no one will ever be a perfect ashlar, and they throw this terrible, terrible statement up, nobody's perfect, indicating that nobody's flawless, which everything that our degrees point toward is talking about being well-informed, being suitable for the builder's use. And that's what the word perfect means in our ritual. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are putting their own understanding and their own spin on it. When you complete the entered apprentice work, you should be the perfect ashlar. You should have your corners squared. You should have virtue. You'd have your vices and superfluities divested. You have your time management down pat. You've got your priorities set. You have internalized the plumb, the square, and the level by a consequence of doing the work that is pointed toward by the first degree. You have circumscribed and subdued your passions and kept your desires within due bounds using that compass that is clearly pointed out when the three great lights are described. What is this? It's a compass. What are we supposed to do with it? Circumscribe and subdue. It's a working tool.
It's hard to believe. A season worth of Masonic discussions and programs, and here we are at the moment of revealing the top podcast for 2021, according to our analytics from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Are you ready? Here we go.
Number 1.
Our most listened to podcast takes us to the high seas, where Worshipful Brother Andrew Martinez of Annapolis Lodge number 89 in Annapolis, Maryland, pursues the legend of the Knights of the Templar and the long rumor that these historical figures could have been connected to pirates.
When my wife and I were first together, we weren't even married yet. We were at the Maryland Renaissance Festival, and I had an outfit pretty much close to Jack Sparrow, and all of a sudden I took second in the contest for costumes, and I've definitely carried it on since then. It's always fun when I go there now and somebody yells, "Pirate!" and I'm like, no, privateer. I steal legally, like Congress. I mean, it's just those aspects that people just kind of wonder about. But I mean, I think all of us brothers have different alternate lifestyles from just outside from Freemasonic Brotherhood. We get a little stiff sometimes in meeting, and sometimes the meetings outside of the meetings are the best meetings because that's when you really get to see the guys actually be who they really are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, my favorite thing is talking with brothers like you, and we're going to get into it now, that have always followed something that's their interest, and they're able to make that Masonic connection. So you talked about one of probably the best known fictionalized pirates of all time. And this is what saddened me a little bit. It was during your presentation, you said Johnny Depp's impersonation of what a pirate would have been like is really not what they were like at all. So take us back to that golden age of piracy, and who were these men? What were they like?
Jack Sparrow was actually monitored off of a real pirate, John Ward. And he was not a Caribbean pirate. He was a Mediterranean pirate. He was operated outside of Tunis. And when Johnny Depp came up with the character, he actually had a couple things in mind. He wanted him to be more like a rock star. So that's why you see Keith Richards show up in, I think it was the third one, and you see him in the aspect. And he kind of mirrored a lot of how he acted off of Keith Richards. But apparently in the real pirate, John Ward, he was actually known as Jack, and he was also known as the Sparrow. So I thank you for asking these questions, because it actually made me go back and review some of the things that I've been looking at. I mean, there's always the Hollywood aspect of the Pirates of the Caribbean. Actually, one of the series that I like a lot more that actually brings in a lot of the other books is Black Sails, the 4-part, 4-season series. That actually hits things a little bit more. But in the Pirates of the Caribbean series, is that they definitely took a lot of the aspects of all Disney, but a lot of the aspects of pirates and slammed it together. I mean, there was historical aspects. You do see the East India Trading Company. You do see the fact that the British are hunting down pirates, definitely making sure they hit the gallows. And you definitely see the other aspect of that, which is the Asian aspect. You see the Singapore, the Madagascar aspects that you don't really talk about a lot. But John Ward, apparently, in quotes, dressed rather curious, and that aspect was rather flamboyant. And I think Johnny did a lot of that. One of the other things that I thought was interesting about Johnny Depp is that he based his character off of Pepe Le Pew. The fact that he was favored himself a ladies' man while he was a skunk and a scoundrel. And it's kind of interesting that he actually did that.
I just thought he was doing the world's greatest Keith Richards impersonation. I love that you have this background. I love that you have this knowledge. You get into Freemasonry back in 19 and now you're sitting there in Blue Lodge. And this is where I always wish I was next to the guy when this moment happened, where you're like, oh, that's a connection. That is a Masonic connection to this thing that I followed my entire life. I need to go home and find a book, or I need to reach out to an older brother to make sure that I'm hearing this right. Where did you first make that tie-in?
I guess the first connection was reading Robinson's Born in Blood, where that one sentence in the beginning where it says, "This too make you a brother of pirates and corsairs." And then he doesn't mention it through the rest of the book. And as I started going down that rabbit hole, it was all of a sudden the lights started popping on left and right. It was like, oh, we talk about certain things in our obligations in the EA degree, the Fellowcraft degree, the Master Mason. You look at early maritime punishments, and they are exact mirrors of our Masonic obligation penalties for the first, second, and third degree. And so that started taking it down a rabbit hole that, okay, who would have known about these things? Well, everybody. The one thing that ties this through is the symbols. So when you start looking at going back to the Knights Templar and the rumors of they were on the Temple Mount, they were in King Solomon's Temple, they went down below, they came up with all this treasure. You see this aspect of a storytelling in our ritual that goes from Blue Lodge to chapter to council to commandery, if you want to go up to the York Rite stream. And definitely Pike hits a lot of this too for Scottish Rite. But you see elements of this that have been passed through. The skull and crossbones as a flag or as a symbol. There's definitely Knights Templar connections there. You look at Golgotha, where Christ died. It was the place of the bones. And you see a lot of skulls and crossbones on crucifixes and in a lot of paintings and symbols that reflect back to that. You also see the skull and crossbones evolve about 1200. Roger of Italy, who was one of the sponsors, he was known as Jolly Roger for the parties that he threw. He was one of the main sponsors for the Knights Templar. And there's a lot of speculation that his flag, which was the skull and crossbones, was flown on a lot of the galleys that the Knights Hospitaller would have used. Then you see the fact that there's a black flag being hoisted along seacoast towns in the Mediterranean when pirates were coming up through the shores. And remember, we'll wind this back a little, is that it means to attempt and to steal, if you look from the Greek, that it didn't have to exactly be any particular nationality or group. It just meant there was raiders coming. So you see the universality of this flag and then eventually the skull and crossbones on it. There's a lot of speculation that those ships that raided Muslim ships and other aspects from the Knights Hospitaller aspect eventually transfers over to being a universal raider symbol. So tying that to Freemasonry is that it means imminent death. If you think about it, if you look at Memento Mori, which is the reminder that you too shall die. If you look at it in the Chamber of Reflection, for a lot of the ritual. It means to Masons that, hey, keep things in check, because you know what? You're going to die at eventual point in time.
If you've enjoyed our countdown, make sure you're subscribed to receive our new episodes when weekly downloads return next week on Monday, January 10th. I'm very excited for the kickoff of our second season. In the coming weeks, we go to the movies to talk about the Harry Potter and Freemasonry connection. Brother Angel Millar will return with his research into fringe Freemasonry. And we'll virtually visit the first traditional observant York Rite chapter in New York State. Until next week, let peace and harmony prevail.